Hi, this is Jeff Mann, and this is Jim George, and we're going to do a video here on Mike Malaska's golf swing action. And I refer to this as the Malaska Move because there's some particular moves that he's quite famous for now, which he does, and a lot of people often refer to this as the Malaska Move. Now, I was introduced to Mike Malaska's Malaska Move by Jim George here because, we are in constant communication, and he one day approached me and said, when he referred to a particular video, and he said that he found that useful to perform a particular move in this zone here to keep him more on plane and to prevent the club shaft being too shallow. And, so it intrigued me, and then I started to read about this move, and I looked at a lot of Mike Malaska videos. And eventually I decided I found it problematic performing the swing that way. And the part that bothered me at the time was the feeling that you get your right hand on top. And I wrote a short review papers contrasting the concept of getting your right hand on top at the P6 position with that of professional golfers, and I demonstrated that they had their right hand under the club and not on top at this position. However, I realized in retrospect that I didn't do my homework sufficiently, and I needed to learn more about Mike Malaska's entire swing philosophy. So I then watched many more of his videos, and I also read his book, which I purchased 3 times over, and I now believe that I have a better understanding of how Mike Malaska thinks of the golf swing. And what I'm going to do today is I'm going to contrast his approach, his swing technique, to that of the swing technique that I promote, which we discussed, Jim and I, when we did a video project in the same room here in December of last year. And this room is actually in the Department of Exercise Sciences at Brigham University. And I met Jim George last year, and he's a professor in the department, and he has a professional quality golf swing. And I asked him at that time, would he be my model golfer so that we could do the video project. And we did a 7-hour video project, which I called How to Perform a Golf Swing Like a PGA Tour Golfer. And what we're going to do today is we're going to contrast that swing style with Mike Malaska's swing style. And Mike Malaska is a golf instructor based in the Phoenix area of Arizona. And he's very popular, and he's a very eloquent teacher. When he teaches, he does it with great passion. And I always enjoy watching how passionate he is when he teaches the golf swing. So even though I'm going to disagree with many of his opinions, we all, golf instructors, and I'm not even a golf instructor, I'm just a golf theorist, are basically targeting our approach to golf instruction with the intent of helping golfers. Now, people have asked me, why can't I do this presentation alone? Why do I have Jim here? And the reason is I'm 68 years old, I'm very inflexible, and I can't perform a golf swing in a professional manner. So what I'm going to be doing, I'm going to be standing here and doing most of the talking. But it's very important when I talk that you listen very carefully to what I say, because if you say what I'm saying and what I'm doing in the swing are not compatible, then ignore what I'm doing, because it's due to physical limitations that I can't do it properly. And you must listen to what I say. And then I'm going to get Jim George to execute many of these moves, and then I'll point out what he's doing, because he can do it in the way that I would like to do it. The other point when we do these video projects is I tend to just come up here and I've got a rough idea what I want to say and how I'm going to present it. But I do it in a very extemporaneous manner. I start to speak, and as ideas come into my mind, I just continue to speak. And sometimes I get a little off topic and I have to come back on topic. And the other thing I've noticed when I look back on our previous video project is I have many slip-of-the-tongue errors. In other words, I'll be talking about something and I'll say, watch how the left hand rotates the club, and I'll actually say the right hand when I meant the left hand. So if I say, watch how the right hand is rotating the club, and you can see it's obviously my left hand, then you must just realize it's a slip-of-the-tongue error. I might also say, watch how the golfer is pronating his left forearm. But it's obvious I'm not pronating my forearm, I'm supinating my forearm. So that's a slip-of-the-tongue error. And if you hear then, just take that into account, because there'll be many of them inevitably during this presentation. Because we're going to do this in one take with no editing. So this might take an hour or two to do the presentation. So I'm going to take the center stage, and Jim's going to stand a little off to the side, and I'm going to start. And what I'm going to do, basically, is I'm going to describe how Mike Malaska recommends, you should perform the golf swing. And I do have some notes that I have off to the side, and ever so often I'm going to have to go and get those notes, because I want to quote him accurately and try not to misrepresent him or misinterpret him as much as possible. Now, it is still possible with the best of intentions that I might not be interpreting what he says correctly. So what I've done, when I post this video on YouTube, is I'm going to have an information section at the bottom, and I'm going to post links to about 5 or 6 Mike Malaska videos. And I would highly recommend you listen to Mike Malaska present his move in those 6 videos, because then you're getting it from the horse's mouth, and you're not getting it secondhand. So if you're a little skeptical that I'm presenting Mike Malaska's opinion correctly, I would highly recommend you watching his original videos. Now, most of the time we're going to be in the center of the stage, but ever so often I'm going to have to step out of the scene to get notes or to maybe get a piece of equipment, but I'm going to try and minimize doing that. So let's start off in the beginning. And Mike Malaska, I don't know the exact details, but having watched a number of his videos and read his book, I get the impression he started off playing golf professionally, and as a youngster, as they say, as a young adult, he just relied on the freedom of his technique, and he said he played golf very well. But as he proceeded in his career and was influenced by, so you could call it standard golf instruction, he found he was getting into problems. And at one video he talked about becoming a train wreck, that he got into a point where he just found that his golf swing was, you could say in a sense, decompensated because of certain problems that he faced. And one of the problems that in one video he says, this was what he was taught to do. This move, which he refers to, is the pulling of the left arm to this position, which is the P6 position, where you still have 90 degrees of angle between the chassis, you haven't released the club, and where the back of your watch face, and therefore the back of your left hand's facing the ball target line. And it says if you do that too actively and too aggressively, you get to this point and you just don't have time to release the club and also rotate your left forearm counterclockwise in order to square the club face. And he says that was a huge problem for him. And, and I really believe that he therefore got the idea that he's against the idea of thinking of the golf swing as a pull-in action, a left arm pull-in action. And he says the way that he thinks of the golf swing is that it is essentially a rotary motion. And in one video that he presented, and I'm going to get my notes because I want to refer to it quite specifically. And this video, which I'm going to have a link to, was a video that he did for the Golf Digest. And the title of the video is Mike Malaska, One Move to Cure It, Approach Shot Tips Golf Digest. And he put, in that video, it only lasts 2 minutes, but he demonstrates a swing which I'm going to demonstrate, and he says, this is probably what the whole swing is built on. So let me show you what he actually demonstrated in that video. So in that video, he just held the club with one arm, and he said, this is the motion. So in this motion, when he said this is what the whole swing is probably built on, you can notice that what he's doing essentially is he's rotating his forearm counterclockwise in this manner. And most of the motion, although he often refers to that he's swinging his left arm and rotating it, in a real golf swing, and I've watched his own golf swing, most of the motion is a left forearm supinatory motion, and there's a very limited amount of external rotation of the left humerus in the left shoulder socket. Now, this feeling that Mike Malaska has of rotating is not only in this zone, as I'm going to show you. He believes that you should start rotating your club counterclockwise from the top, and then there's a pivot point outside your right leg, and I'll show you how you pivot over there. Then you come into impact, and you continue the rotation into the follow-through as if there's a pivot point there, and then you rotate on the plane. So his action looks like this. It's a lovely, smooth-looking rotary motion like this. And another way he demonstrates this whole motion is the concept of what's called the L to L swing. And I'll get Jim to demonstrate essentially an L to L swing. So you notice you start with clubs pointed out there, back of your hands here, and then you rotate through impact, continue rotating to there. So do it a few times here. Look at the lovely smooth rotation of the motion. Now, if you look at that, there's a continuous rotation in that manner. Now, it looks very fluid, but I'm going to explain why I find it problematic. In other words, what I'm going to do in this video presentation, I'm going to say what I think are the advantages of his technique and the disadvantages, and then I'm going to compare it to the swing technique that I favor, which also has advantages and disadvantages. And I'm going to point out that they both have advantages and disadvantages, and you as an individual golfer can decide which one you think might work better for you. But I'm going to take this from the approach not as an individual golfer trying out a technique that's going to work better for me, but I'm going to dissect it in terms of what I call golf mechanics and golf biomechanics.
Now, Jeff, let me just point out one thing. Some golfers, want to mimic and copy the professionals, and that's what we did on that 7-hour video in December. We showed how the professionals swing. And other amateurs have this kind of attitude of saying, I don't really care to swing like a professional. I just want to get the job done. And I think what Jeff is promoting is how to swing as close to the professionals as possible for everyone to get the best results.
Yes, in other words, when I present what I believe the technique that professionals use, which is the technique we presented in the 7-hour video project, that's the technique that I regard as the most optimal way to perform a golf swing. But I realize that that technique I cannot perform because I don't have the flexibility and athleticism to perform it. That means there must be alternative techniques you can use. And therefore, in that sense, I would support the idea that you could use Mike Malaska's swing technique or some other swing technique. But I'm going to present the alternative swing technique with, which I'll just give it a name later, as just to show you the contrasts between Mike Malaska's swing technique and this alternative swing technique. Now, let's start dissecting Mike Malaska's swing technique as he presents it in many of his videos and in his book. He says that there's two things that he doesn't want to get into. As I said, I'll do it from down the line. So here I am here, and he says when you start the downswing, the club has a certain weight, and the weight tends by gravity to want to fall behind you. And if you let it fall behind you and it's gaining momentum, then its effective weight increases. And therefore, if you get to this point and you're in here, so shallow, it's virtually impossible to correct it without doing some hand manipulation technique. So Mike Malaska says you have to do something to counteract the tendency of the club to fall back in that manner. And he feels that the best way to do it is from the top of your backswing here, is to perform a maneuver which is essentially a counterclockwise rotation of the club shaft in this manner, which involves a left forearm supinatory motion, which means that the right forearm has to perform a pronatory action in that way. Now, Mike Malaska is very careful to say that if you did this maneuver using the standard swing action, and the standard swing action often is a pulling of your hands towards the ball target line, as if you're pulling the butt in that manner. If you then did that, and then did this counterclockwise, you can see the club is tumbling over the plane. And he definitely does not want that to happen. The second point, he says, that when you perform this counterclockwise, notice that I'm keeping my right shoulder back. And he says if you, at the same time, start to move your right shoulder forward and move your arm in this manner, while you're doing that, then you're coming over the top and tumbling. And he says, if you're doing that, then you don't understand what he's trying to say. So a critical point, I believe, in his presentation, which I didn't understand initially, and I now believe that what he basically says, that you should feel that you're putting your hands down towards your right thigh, down to the inside here, while you perform this rotary motion like that. And if you do that, you should still be able to come from the inside. So if you're standing like that and you're down like this and you're doing this rotary motion, look at this. So you can still generate a beautiful inside-out swing. So he feels that the great value of that feeling is what you're doing, you pull your hands inside and you perform this maneuver, is that it counteracts the tendency of the club to fall back. Now, when we talk of this rotary motion, even though he talks it from the top, there's 2 points that he brings up in his presentation. Remember the golf swing in this L to L mental image you'll have the swing. He talks of pivot points, and a pivot point, as the way I understand he describes it, is when you are moving the club head from behind that pivot point to in front of it. So he describes 2 critical pivot points. One, there's a pivot point in the backswing. So when you go like this in your backswing and you rotate it onto your plane, then you're moving the club head from here to there, which is behind a pivot point, which is just roughly here at waist level. That's a backswing pivot points, but there are 2 critical pivot points in his swing. And apparently he got this idea from Joe Nicklaus, a golf instructor. And he says the feeling is, as you approach the pivot point here in your, this is like in your mid downswing, the feeling is, as you get to this pivot point and you're performing the motion, the feeling is you're trying to stand the club up like this. Another way I've seen him express it, he says the feeling is of tipping the club shaft forward like that. Now, the question is, does he really want, he also says the feeling is, you see this, that the club shaft goes over your hands. It doesn't come from under your hands. So that's the feeling. Then, if you look at him at the pivot point over here, doing that motion, notice that the right palm gets on top of the club. And another thing that's interesting about Mike Malaska's thinking when in performing this motion, he stated that what he doesn't want you to do, as I said, is to pull your hands like that, and he doesn't want a golfer to adduct the right arm so actively that your elbow leads your hands in you in a pitch location, because he's stating an aggressive move like that. Notice how my right forearm supinates. That causes the club to fall back. So he says that when you perform this counterclockwise move, which he actually calls an over-the-top move from the inside. It's a nice phrase. He says it feels like a tumble, which is this motion, but it's happening here on the inside. Definitely not happening out there. So there, it feels like it's rotating. And he says when you do the move, the feeling is that the right elbow moves down while you're performing the move like this. And the feeling is that the right elbow sits alongside your right shirt seam. And then, of course, moves forward. Now, this motion that he's making, I'm going to try and demonstrate. I refer to that as a punch elbow motion. Now, the term punch elbow motion and pitch elbow motion, I learned about these terms from Homer Kelly in his book, The Golfing Machine. And I'm going to refer a lot to the book, the Golfing Machine book, and I'm going to refer to it as a TGM concept. And Homer Kelly said that there are two ways to perform a motion with your right arm in this zone. He said the one way is what I'm doing here, which is a punch elbow motion. The right elbow is alongside your shirt seam, and you can see the degree of pronation. Notice how my hand is getting more on top of the shaft, and then like that. That's the feeling. Another way to think of it, it's somewhat of an overhand throw motion. This is what it looks like. The other motion that Homer Kelly described was a pitch elbow motion. And what characterizes a pitch elbow motion is the elbow leads the hand, and you can see that this forearm is supinated. Then as you perform the motion, notice that the right forearm is pronating from a very supinated position, and then at impact, it's going to be neutral. That's a pitch elbow motion, and another way to think of it is a side arm or an underhand pitching motion, like that. So once you understand these two motions, it's very important that you understand them, because the difference between Mike Malaska's swing technique and the other technique that I'm going to refer to has a lot to do with this motion. Now, Mike Malaska states that, I'll do it maybe from down the line like this. So just imagine you have this feeling of doing this. So you feel like you're standing the club up, or you feel like you're tipping the club shaft, or you're forming a counterclockwise motion. Now, obviously, he doesn't want to get to this position where you've tumbled it over the plane. And he states in his video, he says he does a drill. So, just to get the feeling of it, like this with one hand. And he says there's a pivot point here in your thigh, and you practice this drill to get, you see I'm performing a punch elbow motion like that. But he says, in your real swing, you don't actually see this phenomenon, because in your real swing, you're moving both hands together, and your body is turning in space. So watch what effect that would have. I'm going to try and do it from a number of different views. So if you look at it from down the line, if you were to pull your hands to the inside and you're doing this motion, but you also turn in your body, notice as you turn your body and both hands are working, there has to be a movement of your hands towards the target. So watch here. So you could practice the feel of it here. And if you just kept your hands stationary, then you would be overpronating and tumbling. But just imagine you performing the swing where you're rotating your body and moving. Notice that my hands are moving from the pivot point there to impact. So they're moving targetwards while you perform the motion. And I believe if you perfect those two feelings, in other words, if the degree of forward rotation of your hands to the target are perfected with this rotary motion, you will actually come to here and look very similar to a professional golfer. And the characteristic thing of a professional golfer at this position is that the club is parallel to the ball target line, the toe is up if you use a neutral grip. Now, I looked at a number of videos of Mike Malaska performing a full golf swing, and in fact, I then produced capture images to see what he actually does in his real life golf swing. And I've posted captured images on my website, and I've got links to them in the information section on this YouTube video. And it's very important that you look at them, because then you can see that when I describe what he does in his real swing is true. In other words, so here's what I notice Mike Malaska looks like at piece 6. His club shares parallel ball target, toe is up. In other words, he doesn't look, it certainly doesn't look, he looks beautiful. It's just perfect position there. There's one clue I noticed where I thought he looked different to many of the golfers, which I'm going to, talk about later, is that at this position, his right palm was partly in this position. In other words, if you're performing a punch elbow motion and you perfect it with this motion here, then you'd look like this. You don't look like this. This is a critical difference. His hand looks partially in top. Then as he goes forward, obviously towards impact, then watch here. If you pronate it with perfection, and I notice he does it very well in his full golf swing, then you come into impact like this, and perfect. Flat left wrist, club shaft, square the club face, and his right hand is like that. Now, if it's done well, it works very well. And in fact, the only difference I noticed to a standard swing, because when I'm looking at his swing, it looks just like the swing that, I'm going to describe later. The critical difference is the motion of your right palms. In other words, the right elbow is held slightly behind your hip, and it's doing this motion, it's not doing this motion. And I'm going to show you there's a huge effect when you do it this way. Now, let's presume, what is the disadvantage of this technique? I mean, why shouldn't everyone do it? I mean, what could possibly go wrong? It seems such a good idea. You pull your hands in, perform this rotary motion, and as you turn your body, just look how beautifully it flows in to impact. I think the problem can be if you mistime the two phenomena that are happening biomechanically. In other words, you are performing this punch elbow motion, which is a counterclockwise rotation of the forearms, while your hands are moving to the target. Now, if you have your hands are moving to the target too sluggishly, too slow, and this is happening, then obviously you could go over, you could tumble over the plane, or if it happens closer to impact, you could look like this. Notice what I'm demonstrating here. At impact in Mike Malaska's swing, notice this looks neutral. let's presume you were just a little too fast with this maneuver, and your hand was there. Notice my right palm is facing the ground. It's not facing the target. So if you did that in your right palm, look at my club face, it's closed. So there could be a problem if you can't time these two events in perfect synchrony. I think the one problem you would get is a propensity to have too close the face and hitting your balls left. Now, the opposite problem could occur, where let's presume you're pronating, you're doing this maneuver, but your hands get to the target too soon, so that when you come to here, your club face is open, which means you'll hit pull slices. But I think that's less likely to happen with his technique. That's the good thing about it. While with the standard technique, which I'm going to describe later, that is a huge problem. Because even though I favor it, if you don't do it right and you get your hands here, with your hands supinating in a pitch elbow motion, you get to impact like this, and you haven't squared the face. You have an open club face with too much forward shaft lean. And that's just going to cause push slices all the time. And that's a huge problem that plagues many golfers who use what you could call the standard technique. So therefore, you could say the good thing about Mike Malaska techniques, it makes it that particular problem less likely. And I would agree with that point. Now let's talk about what happens after that. Because remember, it's one continuous motion. He states that when you perform this counterclockwise rotation, and if you do it perfectly, you don't stop here at impact. You continue to do it like that. And this action which he's doing, in the golfing machine book, is called a swivel action, where you swivel it onto the plane again. Now, this swivel action, which Mike Malaska talks about, he states that you have an imaginary pivot point. I mentioned there was one here, and there's one outside your left foot. So here you're pivoting, and he says it's a critical point to pivot in this zone. Because if you put your hands forward of this pivot point, then you're going to have the problem that it's too late. And the same thing which comes to this point. He says you should think of pivoting here. Notice where. It's just about in this zone. Now, in his description of this motion, which is just a continuous, if you think of it, it's just a continuous rotary motion. What is actually happening there? Now, it's interesting. I believe that in this motion, watch here, it is a rotary motion, but where is it happening? I believe it's happening at two potential levels. It's happening at the level of your wrist, so you can roll in your wrist, or your forearm to do that motion. Now, interestingly, in one video I noticed that Mike Malaska did, he says no, he's not rolling it, he's just getting this to upcock here. In other words, it hinges up. So if you think of the L to L swing, you hinge up there, you rotate, and you hinge up there. So it's a rotary motion, and he says, I just feel that I'm hinging up onto the plane. He says he's not performing a rotary motion, and in one video he demonstrates what he perceives to be a rotary motion. So he says, this is a rotary motion. See there? And that is, look at the club shaft. It's not going up the plane. This is a very exaggerated left forearm supinatory motion. And there's a golf instructor who actually endorsed that idea of doing this. And this is called a hand crossover release action. And that's definitely not what Mike Malaska endorses. What Mike Malaska wants to do is the feel of getting back onto your plane here so you can complete the swing. And what you're doing then is the feeling of hinging up your left wrist. Now, what I'm saying is, I believe that it's biomechanically impossible to do that motion where you hinge up your left wrist. I'll do it from down the line so that he wants there. He doesn't want it like that. That's a hand crossover. He wants you to just go there and hinge it up onto your plane. Now, I'm saying it's biomechanically impossible to avoid rolling motions through that action, like this. And why do I say that? And the reason is think of it. If your hands are here, and you're keeping your hands very close to the pivot point. In other words, Mike Malaska is opposed to the idea of a swing action where you drive your hands forward out like that. He often says that's a handle drag. He doesn't want that to happen. He wants this swivel action to occur in this zone here. Now, if it occurs there, right, remember the club is traveling at a tremendous speed. It has momentum. And in fact, Mike Malaska says you have to deal with the momentum of the club. The club is traveling at speed, and it says for a smooth swing, you must redirect the momentum like that onto the plane. But I'm saying if you're doing that, you have to have a roll motion. Now, where does the roll motion happen? There's two potential places. So the one place it could roll is at the level of your wrist. Now, people will say, but the wrist doesn't roll. I mean, you could bend your left wrist, but that's not a roll, right? And this is cocking, which is obviously not happening here. So if you do this, watch, notice how my left wrist bends. Or the other option, you could do it with a pure swivel, trying to keep your left wrist straight, just using a forearm motion. But I'm saying it's a roll motion at wrist level and at forearm level, and the reason is that Mike Malaska wants to hinge up the wrist, which means it's moving into radial deviation. So if you bend your left wrist and radially deviate it, that biomechanically is called left wrist circumduction. So here is what circumduction is. This motion of the left wrist, it's not a forearm motion, it's a rolling motion, is due to two phenomena. It's due to the fact that you're moving in the plane of dorsiflexion, palmar flexion, like that, hinging motion, and ulnar and radial deviation. If you do both at the same time, your wrists roll. So when Mike Malaska says you should, at this point, swivel it up like that, I looked at many of his videos, and it's obvious to me. I've posted a video on a link to capture images, and this is what he looks like at the impact. He looks like this. It's a very characteristic look. Notice that the club shaft has passed my arm, and the right wrist, the forearm, right forearm is pronated, and the right wrist is straightened. This is, see this action? Then I notice the very next frame in his video, it looks like this. So what is happening here is that he's got a certain degree of bending of the left wrist and left wrist circumduction, and a small degree of forearm supination, which becomes greater as you go further. So in this zone, he has what I call a rolling motion. Now, why am I spending so much time about this point? And I believe this is the critical difference between the swing that I'm going to be promoting and Mike Malaska's swing. Is I believe that optimally, when you come into impact, to hit the ball straight, you want to square the club head path and square the club face. Both have to be square. But if you look at professional golfers, let's say you've got a great swing and you've learned to square. Now, at impact, your club head path is square, club face is square. I believe that you really need to keep a square for many inches like this, watch. In fact, I'll show you when we get into the alternative swing that professional golfers do a motion that looks like this. Notice that my club shaft and my left arm are in a straight line, and there's no point that the club shaft passes my arm. And I believe that if your club shaft passes your arm in this zone here, you're either flipping or rolling due to a left form supination, or both flip rolling. Now, the disadvantage of doing that, and I refer to a zone between impact, which is the P7 position, and here, the next 12 inches, as the immediate impact zone. So this is the P7.2 position, and this impacts P7. I believe that optimally, you want to keep your club face square to the club head path like this. You see what I'm doing? You don't want it to be doing this. See what I'm doing? Look how much the club face is rolling. Remember, the club face is always straight in line with the back of your left hand. So if your back of your left hand is doing that, that's a lot of rotation. And I refer to that as a high ROC swing action. ROC stands for rate of closure of the club face.
Jeff, let me just point out one other thing. Some of the viewers might be saying to themselves, well, it doesn't matter because the ball's already gone.
Yes.
And I know you're going to cover this, but just so they're realizing that it does matter.
Yeah, the reason why I believe it matters essentially is that the club face stays on the ball for 1/4000th of a second. And if you're swinging the club head through impact at 100 miles an hour in the club head, your hands, the club face travels about 3/4 of an inch in contact with the ball. And you would say, well, if I could just keep it square for that time period, that's good enough. But I'm saying if you are performing a swing like this through impact, then you have to have perfect timing to get it square. Because in this rotary motion, which look at it, if you're swinging it really fast, the chance of even getting it square at impact, I think, is difficult. And then, if it's not square at impact, you're not going to hit it straight. But even if you get a square at impact, it might, within the next fraction of a second, be turning. So I believe it's very difficult to hit the ball straight on a consistent level when you do that. Now, there is a golfer who actually uses this technique professionally, and that's Luke Donald. So if you look at Luke Donald's swing, this is what he looks like. In other words, by the time his hands are just past his left thigh, he's already into a full swivel like that. So that means between impact, which is here, in the next 6 inches of hand motion, he's performed the swivel. Now, if you could time it perfectly, you can still hit the ball great. And Luke Donald, we know, has won PGA Tour competition, so he's a superb golfer. But we also know that he's an inconsistent golfer. There are days when he just cannot hit the ball straight. Particularly, this becomes a problem with your driver because the club head speed is so much greater. So I'm going to be promoting a different way to think of the golf swing. And one of the characteristic features of that alternative way to think of the golf swing is that it allows you to keep the club face square to the club head path from P7 to P7.2. And I'm going to do that with a tennis racket, actually. Yeah. So I do it with this badminton racket because it's so visible, the racket face. So I believe that the optimum way, notice, you have to rotate it to square it in the late downswing, whatever technique you use, if you use a neutral grip. If you had a strong grip like that, then you could avoid having to use what Homer Kelly in his TGM book called a power accumulator number 3 release action. But because most people use a neutral grip, let's say like that, you're going to have to do this motion. But I believe that optimally, once you've done that, you should, for the next 6 to 12 inches, look like this. Notice that this is not rolling anymore. It's staying square to your path. It's not square to the target because from down the line, your club head path is moving inside left, right? But as it moves inside left, if you keep the club face square, that means it's not rolling. And I believe personally, and I'm going to go into more detail later, that the only way that this is biomechanically possible is you have to avoid any left forearm supinatory motion and any left wrist circumductory motion. In other words, all motion should only be controlled through the area of your left shoulder circuit. So it looks like this. And the great analogy is a backhanded tennis swing. Notice there's no roll. Notice as soon as I do supinate my forearm, look what happens to the club, racket face. It's a tremendous amount of roll. Or if you flip your wrist and you're doing circumduction, it also rolls. So if you flip rolling in this zone, I believe it's impossible to be a drive holder. And I think that's very important. So I'm going to, at a later point, compare the two swings in greater detail. And I'm also going to talk about how Mike Malaska's concepts of the pivot motion differs to the standard swing. But before I do that, I'm going to talk about what I would call the standard swing.
Yeah, Jeff, I just want to remind the viewers, and we've talked about this before, this is what Mike Malaska recommends. And we've said this is his motion. And he says that this is what the cool golfers do out on the driving range, and they're kind of standing here just doing this. And what Jeff is teaching is that we're not doing this. And the drive hold is more like this. It's a totally different approach.
Now to explain this alternative technique, I'm going to explain in what way it works differently, both conceptually and then in execution. So let's start off with the concept of performing a golf swing. I think there's a great similarity to a backhanded tennis action swing. When you look at a person playing tennis, this is the motion he performs, backhanded. You would think, why don't you just keep the racket face square through impact? So when I talk about backhanded tennis shot, I'm not talking about top spin or slice spin or side spin. Just presume you want to hit the ball dead straight down the center of the court. What you want to do is a motion like this, right? Where the racket face at the moment of ball impact is square to your target, and where the path of the racket is square. Then the ball will go straight. Then you might say, why don't you just move it like this? And the reason why you look at professional tennis players is biomechanically, it's very difficult to move and get a big swing keeping it square. So most people find it comfortable to rotate it. See, like that. And then as they swing through, they rotate it and square it. So in that sense, there is an obligatory rotary motion. In other words, in the backswing, you have to pronate it, and at some point in the downswing, you have to supinate your forearm, and also maybe actually rotate your humerus to get a square racket face. Now, in the golf swing, Homer Kelly stated, let me do it with a little golf club here. I use the short club for demonstration purposes. It's a child's club. Homer Kelly said, you could perform a golf swing two ways. You either pull the club, because your left hand's in front of it, and he called that a swing in action, and I refer to that as TGM swing. Or he said you could, because your right hand is behind the handle, you could push the club through impact. And he called that a hitting technique. Another term he used was an axe handle technique, like you chopping a tree down with an axe. By contrast, in his swinging motion, where he called it swinging, he said you actually feel like you're pulling the club simply because your hands are in front of it, but it's a swinging motion, not really a direct pull. And he also called that the rope handle technique. So if you're in backswing, he said if there was a rope that you were pulling on with your left hand, and you were pulling on an angle towards the ball target line, the feeling is you're pulling, but this is critical. You don't pull just with your left hand. The pulling is due to the swinging motion. Now, what causes the swinging motion in a professional golf swing, I believe, is the pivot action. So this is what it looks like. So if you look at a professional golfer, in the backswing, they rotate their pelvis, rotate the upper torso, look where the left shoulder socket is, and then they pivot in space. And during this motion, starting usually with a pelvic rotation and then shortly thereafter with an upper body rotation, the left shoulder moves forward towards the target. And it's that motion that pulls the left arm, because the left arm is essentially just a lever. Now, that motion pulls it forward. But of course, if you look at the swinging motion, it also moves down. So there's two components, a forward motion and a downward motion. And what makes it move down, obviously gravity helps, but of course you're pulling much faster than gravity. So people are using their left shoulder girdle muscles. So I believe if you think of what professional golfers are doing, they are performing essentially a left arm swinging action, or if you want to call it a lead arm swinging action, or you could call it a TGM swinging action. And I'm going to get Jim to demonstrate that action with one arm, because he's gifted to do it with one arm alone. And let's look what he's doing.
Okay.
So he's just going to go back and forward. So notice it's a continuous swinging motion. The characteristic point you need to notice is he's powering the swing with his pivot. Notice he starts the downswing with a rotation of his pelvis, then the upper body, and as that's in motion, it's pulling the club in, and it's a pure swinging motion. Now, that's intrinsically what he's doing. But how do we do this precision? In other words, what principles could you use to ensure that when you perform in this swinging motion with the left arm, that you're going to be a very consistent golfer? So there are two principles, I believe, that are extremely useful. The one principle is the concept, which we'll soon describe, of the intact left arm flying wedge. And if you think about it, if you're swinging this club in space, like Jim just demonstrated, if you allow your left wrist to bend at any time during your downswing so that the club shaft passes your left arm like this, this is wobbling, right? Look at this. I'm swinging, but what's the chance that I'm going to get a square club face and a square club head path at impact if I'm doing this? So, to me, the intact left arm flying wedge concept, which I'm going to describe, solves this problem in a dramatically efficient way. And when I say this, again, is a concept that comes from Homer Kelly's TGM book. And why I endorse the concept of the left arm flying wedge is simply because I've noticed that's what professional golfers often do. Not all of them, but most of them. So let me describe the left arm flying wedge concept for you using the golf club. So this is a wedge. And if you stand at rest like this, notice there's this V shape between the club. And that's due to the way we grip the club. You could eliminate it or make it smaller by using what's called a mid-palmer grip. So if you put like some people hold a putter, hold your club in line with your left arm, it almost looks like 180 degrees. It's a very small. We call that a small accumulator number 3 angle. In other words, the closer this angle is to 180 degrees, the smaller the accumulator number 3 angle. Another way some people grip the club is they hold it in the fingers like that, so that this is almost at 90 degrees to the left arm. And then they stand like that. Look how big this angle is now. We call that a large accumulator number 3 angle. And most golfers are intermediate, so they hold what's called a low palmer grip, like that, where it's under the heel pad like that, and across the index finger. And Ben Hogan used to just hold it like that. And that angle here is moderate in size. Now, because you have this angle at address, if I hold this in line here, you can see you have a wedge. That's where the concept of a wedge comes in, is that if your club shaft is in line with your left arm, you essentially have what we call a left arm flying wedge. And in the backswing, the whole idea is in this TGM swinging action is that the intact flying wedge, the left arm flying wedge, stays intact. In other words, at no time do you bend your left wrist or markedly bow your wrist. And that means that when you swing through impact, notice what I'm doing. It's the swinging motion of an intact flying wedge. Now, I'm going to do it again with a tennis racket, because this is essentially what professional tennis players do. When you see a tennis player hit a backswing, notice that the racket shaft, and therefore the racket itself, is in line with my left arm. Notice in here it's always in line. And when I swing through impact, it's still in line, and I'll do it through the follow-through. Look there, it's still in line. In other words, this motion is equivalent to an intact left arm flying wedge. There is no time point in a backhanded tennis stroke that the left wrist bends, because tennis players would then be flippy and inconsistent if they let that happen. So this is the key concept. So you want an intact flying wedge in a swinging manner. Now, I'm going to get Jim to perform a full golf swing, and I'm going to show you in his full golf swing that he has an intact flying wedge. And what we're going to do is, if you stand a little to that side, stop. You'll notice that he prefers to stand with the club perpendicular, so this is not in a straight line. But within a few inches, he bends his right wrist, flattens this one out so that this is in a straight line. And when you have that in a straight line, that's called a geometrically flat left wrist. Now let's watch what happens. By this position, the club shaft is still in line with his left arm, so he still has an intact flying wedge. By the time he gets to the P3 position there, you'll notice that he still has a flying wedge. Doesn't allow this wrist to bend. The club shaft is always in line. The other principle that he's performing, and he does it instinctively, he always keeps the club shaft on plane, which means that the end of the club shaft that is closest to the ground at any time point in his backswing, downswing, and early follow-through is always pointing at the ball target line. Now go to your in backswing position. So you can see he's on plane, a line drawn from here would point at the ball target line. He has an intact flying wedge. Now come down the plane to P5, notice it's still intact. Get to P5.5, still intact. Get to P6, intact. Now, then through the late downswing, the whole flying wedge is going to rotate as a unit. See how it's rotating? This is still in line and you come to impact. Then after impact, what he's going to do is he's going to keep the club shaft in line. So notice what's happening here. If you look at it from a rotational aspect, it's still intact. From an angular perspective, it has not bypassed his left arm. In other words, the club, if you look at it with a tennis racket, this is the motion. The racket has passed my left arm as viewed from a face-on perspective. But if you look at it from a bird's eye view, looking from above, my racket shaft and my left arm are rotating at the same angular velocity through impact and beyond impact, and that keeps the club shaft in line. So Jim will do that. And notice that there's no bending of the left wrist, and notice there's no supination of the forearm. Now, you can see, I believe, why this is intrinsically such a useful technique. Just let's think of it again. We know in tennis, you take your racket there, and then we're just going to rotate into impact. In this motion, the only rotary motion that you have is the need to square the face, right? So here. So in the golf swing, at a certain point he needs to rotate it to square the face. So notice he's on the plane. Now when he comes down the plane, there is no rotation happening. It's only going to happen between P6.5 and impact, right? So in that last 2 to 3 foot of travel is when he rotates it. So to me, the wonderful thing about this technique is essentially, in contrast to Mike Malaska's thinking, where he talks of the golf swing as being a rotary motion, counterclockwise rotary motion, starting all the way from your end backswing, through the early downswing, mid downswing, transitioning late downswing into impact, and through. The only rotary motion happening in this type of swing with the intact left arm flying wedge is here, in this zone. Now, let's go back and look at from down the line view here. We're going to consider what happens between P4 and P5.5. So the end backswing there, and he's going to come to P.5. Look at the flying wedge and notice that it does not rotate in space. So go back to P4. Here's the flying wedge. Notice he's going down. The flying wedge is coming down the plane and it's not turning counterclockwise. Now you would say, what prevents this problem? We know that Mike Malaska said that one of the problems that he deals with all the time is he sees golfers doing this, right? This is very off-plane, right? This is way too shallow. And this, if you drew a line from the butt end of my plug, is pointing well outside the ball target line. And he says, this is what's happening because the weight of the club pulls you like this. So how does Jim prevent that? Because you didn't notice him doing that. So the question is, if you decide to use the intact left arm flying wedge technique, the question then becomes, how do you prevent that problem that Mike Malaska has solved that problem in this way? He pulls, so what Mike Malaska says, by performing this counterclockwise rotation like this, you counteracting the tendency the club to fall back, and you end up in a middle position which looks exactly like Jim's swing. See it like there? It looks the same. But although it looks the same, the biomechanics are different. Because Mike Malaska says he can feel a counterclockwise rotation from the swing. So the question is, if Jim is not performing that feeling, what keeps the club shaft from falling back? And this is the answer to that is the way you use your right arm, and that brings into the concept of the right forearm flying wedge. I'll use the smaller one. Thank you. So we have this concept of an intact flying wedge coming down the plane. But there is the possibility if you pull with your hands that this drops down too far and you're off plane. So the concept of the right forearm flying wedge is the right forearm flying wedge consists of the right arm and the bent wrist like that, held in that position. And its function in the early and mid downswing is to support the entire flying wedge, which means you're supporting the weight of the club so that it doesn't fall back behind you. And this is the motion you perform, see? Notice that my right palm is always parallel to the plane. So you could come down the turn shoulder plane without shallowing your club shaft, or you could come to a shallower plane like, let's say,
Ben Hogan came down to the hand plane thing. So there's various degrees of shallowing here. But whether you're shallow enough or not, the flying wedge is intact, and this is supporting it. Now, this is the critical point, is the motion that you're doing is this motion, which is a pitch elbow motion. So notice that the right elbow leads the hands and the right forearm is supinated. Now you would say, how supinated should you be? So watch here. Let's say you pull your arms down with your right arm. If you pull your elbow towards your side too aggressively and you supinate it too much like that, notice what happens. My palm is facing the sky. That's too shallow. The club is falling back. So one thing you have to learn with this technique is when you perform this pitch elbow motion, is you have to get the exact degree of supination of your forearm. Because you want to be here, you don't want to be over supinated. So you would say, how do you get the feel of it? And the answer is simple. Again, remember, here's the intake flying wedge on the plane, and you aim in this at the ball target line, like this. So once you have the feel of where this is in space, you then acquire the feel of just like that to support it. Now, the critical point here is the motion I said to you is as follows. If you perform in the golf swing, the flying wedge is going to be rotating into space like this. And your right forearm is at all times parallel to the plane of the intake flying wedge. So if you look at my left palm, which is geometrically flat left wrist, and you imagining it rotate, you have to do this motion. So notice your elbow here, in contrast to Mike Malaska's swing where the elbow's held further back by Ryan. People who use this technique get the right elbow in front of the hip, like this. And from here, notice what's happening. Two phenomena. You straighten your right arm, and you pronate your forearm. Notice in this motion that your arm, your hand, in this position is facing the sky somewhat, and at impact it faces the target. There is no time that you ever feel it facing the ground, because you're not performing a punch. Now you might say, well, can you get into problems doing that? And of course you can. So just what Mike Malaska said. He says, if you're coming down here, and this arm has been swung, which means it's pulling. If you pull too aggressively and you do this too aggressively, you could get to this position and you're stuck because you just did this too actively. So the question becomes, how do professional golfers solve this problem? In other words, let's look at Jim's swing again. And I'm going to just get him to do it with the left arm alone. Swing in motion. Notice when he's doing this that he has an intake flying wedge. So we'll stop it at different positions. If he stops here, you'll notice it's straight in line. He has a geometrically flat wrist. Goes a little further, it's still in line, and now it's returning into impact. Then the question is, go back and do this in space. What prevents him from getting his hands too far forward? Right? And I believe this is the correct answer. When I say that the left arm swinging motion as described by Homer Kelly is a feeling of swinging the arms, the left arm, and the power comes from the pivot, which I'll describe later. Then the question is, how do you avoid getting your hands too fast into impact? And I believe there's two ways you could pull the club. One way is through the simple swinging motion as I've described. But what is also possible, because
the two arms are independently moving in space and they're only connected through the shoulder sockets, it's possible that as you're swinging, that you could be pulling with your left arm independently of the swing action, and that's what causes this problem. So you get into impact looking like this. Notice I got far too much forward shaft lean, the club face is way open. So how do you avoid that problem? And I believe the critical thing, if you decide to use this technique, is that you must never have the feeling of trying to pull the left arm independently of the swing in action induced by the pivot. Now you would say, well, that's not so easy to do, because you could picture, here I am swinging in space, the left shoulder's pulling. So what allows you to time it right? So let's go into the underlying mechanics and biomechanics. So I believe the answer is as follows. Go to your end backswing position. Now, in TGM terms, if you'll notice, what he's done, he's loaded what we call power accumulator number 4. And power accumulator number 4 is when you elevate your arm and adduct it across your chest. That's called a loaded position. Now, in his downswing, he's going to unload it, because that's where you get the power from. So at some point from this position, this left arm is going to be moving downwards. So it's moving away from the elevated position. And it's also moving from an adducted position to abduction. So it's moving in 2 dimensions. And what causes that to happen? Let's discuss it. Notice between P4 and P4.2, he doesn't unload it. So what's happening in his early downswing, he's starting to rotate his pelvis. Notice that the shoulder's starting to turn, but this is still fully loaded. So for the first 6 to 12 inches of travel, can you see how he's retaining his upper torso around his rightward tilted spine? The shoulder is moving downwards, this shoulder is moving to the target, pulling the club. But at somewhere in this zone is when he's going to release power accumulator number 4, so that the distance between his hands and the right shoulder socket is going to increase. Right? There, he's doing that. Now, what happens when you do that? Notice, the fulcrum point for your swing then becomes the left shoulder socket. Right? Because as the left arm releases, it's equivalent to a lever rotating around a fulcrum point in a circular manner. Now, during that period, when you're releasing power accumulator number 4, I'm sure that any golfer who uses those techniques feels like he's pulling them down. Not independent. In other words, you don't feel like you're pulling the handle down deliberately. In other words, you never start the swing by pulling the hand down. But you feel that the club is being pulled down by the left hand because of the release of power accumulator number 4. So let's look what happens to the swing. So from here to P5.5, it has a hand-arc path like that. Now, this is the interesting part about human golf biomechanics. What happens between here and impact? Notice, go back to P4. The left shoulder socket is moving targetwards. And then that's putting the club targetwards like that. At this point, if you look at a really good professional golfer, and Jim can mimic that swing, the left shoulder socket's going to be moving up and inside, right? Straightens his left leg. This part of the body extends, it's going up and inside. Notice what effect that has. It changes the hand-arc path, so it's more target like that. But because he's not pulling anymore, so as you're going up, the left arm actually slows down. And it's been shown, if you look at 3D graphs of professional golfers,
virtually all of them show a slowing of the left arm speed, its angular velocity, in the late downswing. And that is absolutely necessary to allow a lot of things to happen. As the left arm slows down, it gives time for the club to release, to catch up to your left arm, and for you to rotate into the impact. And this all happens automatically if you are performing the golf swing correctly. So why people get into trouble is they are moving and pulling the left arm like this, in this zone, independently, too actively. They think they're going to hit the ball hard, and they just pull. And I agree with Mike Malaska. This is the Achilles weakness of this technique. And if you said to me that you can't master this, in other words, you have a propensity, no matter how hard you try, that you can't slow your left arm down, you can't perform the correct pivot motions, and you have a propensity to always come into impact like this, then this technique might not be suitable for you. You might do better by performing Mike Malaska's swing technique. You know, I could readily agree with it. But the other beauty of this technique, let's take it further, is I mentioned to you why I think this technique of the flying wedge, which is a left arm swinging technique, is so conducive to great ball striking, why professional golfers use it, is as follows. I mentioned to you that your hand, you have to pronate it to get it on the plane. Then in this backhanded tennis shot, I'm going to rotate into impact like this. So there has to be a rotation like that to square the face, and that usually happens in this zone here. But the beautiful thing is what happens after impact. Notice in a tennis shot, I can control it because I'm working, I've rotated into impact, and all I have to do to keep it square to the club head path is one, stop supinating, because I had to supinate it to square. But you see, you don't want to continue to supinate. The second thing, you don't want to flip your wrist, because that can also produce a roll. So those are the critical things, is that you perform in a very fluid swing action where the flying wedge is rotating in space, squared impact, and then this ability to keep it square to the path. And I think that's one of the strong points. So I was watching the US Open this weekend, and it was won in 2017 by Brooks Koepka, and he's a perfect drive holder. If you look at him through impact, this is what he looks like through impact. He gets out to there, and there's still no swivel action. Then eventually in the late swing about here, you'll notice he performs it. So I'm going to get Jim to perform it like most professional golfers who use a drive hole technique. And I'm talking about golfers like Henrik Stenson, Adam Scott, Rory McIlroy, Jordan Spieth, Dustin Johnson. They all perform this action. So let's watch what actually happens. So he comes into impact. He's rotated a square, so the whole flying wedge is square. Notice the next 12 inches. Notice the club head path is moving inside left because he's still rotating. Notice that the club face is staying square to the path from impact all the time. That is what I call a stable club face. That is what we call a low ROC, low rate of closure, through the immediate impact zone. And I believe that this technique of the flying wedge, which you keep intact, allows you to perform it with great efficiency and fluidity. Now, I want to show you something very characteristic about this technique, is the bent wrist. In other words, I mentioned there are two ways I can recognize Mike Malaska's rotary swing motion. I can see it here that he's using a punch elbow because it looks like that, while the other technique is to have a pitch elbow. The other characteristic thing, when I notice Mike Malaska at impact, his right wrist is straightening and his right forearm's pronating, so he looks like this. That's very different to this look. You notice? In this look, you have a bent wrist and your left wrist is either flat or slightly bowed. This look. It's very different look. So, to me, a characteristic feature of a drive holder is that bent wrist. Now, it is theoretically possible to be a drive holder just by, watch out, notice it's going through. If your right shoulder doesn't move enough down planing and your right arm gets too straight, you can't keep your right wrist bent and it tends to straighten. You see there? Like there, it's straight. That just means that you've run out of right arm. But professional golfers are usually very skilled at getting their right shoulder down plane so that they go through impact with a slightly bent right arm. It only straightens after impact, and they keep that bent wrist. And look, why is that so useful? The reason why it's so useful is the way that your right arm can play a very important role both in your late downswing and through impact. I mentioned to you that the whole flying wedge is rotating into impact like this, the right elbow arm is in this position, pitch elbow position. Then watch what happens. The right arm straightens and the right forearm starts to pronate from a supinated position to neutrality. While it's doing that, you could apply push pressure with the base of your right palm against the base of your left thumb, and that's called pressure point number 1. And if you do that, watch, notice that you're putting pressure against the left thumb, which helps you. See, you have to square the face. Homer Kelly called that the release of power accumulator number 3. And if your right forearm straightens at perfect speed and you pronate your right forearm with perfect speed, that action of your right arm allows your right palm to apply continuous push pressure against the base of the left thumb to smooth out the release. Then, through impact, notice if you keep the push pressure, it stabilizes you through impact. And an analogy I would give you is playing tennis. You could play tennis, with just one arm action, where you just swing through impact like that, keeping a stable left wrist. And you would say, how do you keep from flipping? What prevents a tennis player from flipping? And the answer is, he keeps a relatively firm wrist, but it's the rhythm. So if you have very good rhythm and you move your arm at the same momentum, the same angular velocity as your racket shaft, then you could be stable and have a stable club face like this through impact. Another way you could do a tennis hand, you see some people use a two-handed tennis shot. Now, the critical thing, if you decide to play tennis two-handed, backhanded tennis shot, notice that this wrist has to be bent. If you did that, you would flip it. So what tennis players do, and they do it for a different reason, because in tennis the ball's coming at you with force, and they want to hit the ball and stabilize it so it doesn't get jarred in case it's an off-center hit. So some tennis players prefer to stabilize it in that way with a bent wrist. Notice how the right arm performs this motion. So it's the same thing in the golf swing. You're using that right arm in that manner. And the characteristic thing is, as I say, you're starting from a pitch location, which means your arm is supinated. You must come into impact so that your palm faces the target. You don't want to be overpronated, and you keep the bent wrist so that your right palm is exactly parallel to the intake flying wedge. And for the next few inches to impact, this is what you look like. That is exquisitely stable. And I think it's that characteristic that I think is so wonderful about this technique. And many professional golfers use this technique. Now, I'll come back to maybe some more comparisons later, but now I want to talk about the pivot action and show you the difference between Mike Malaska's thinking versus the way I think about it and the way that professional golfers perform the golf swing. Mike Malaska stated, he had a student, I was watching one of his videos, and the student did this motion. So he started the pivot action and he had a right hip spinning motion like that. And he looked like this. The right elbow was blocked like that. And he was blocked, and you know, in this position, you can't get your right elbow past your hip, and then you try to flip it. So Mike Malaska said that what you need to do is you can't invade the spacing right of your right hip area. He says when you in this position, you have space here. In your backswing, as you rotate the right hip back, the space is actually increased. So when Mike Malaska starts the downswing, he says you have to keep that right hip back, and so that there's room for your elbow to get in this zone so you don't get blocked. And he says the way you can learn this motion, and it's quite an interesting concept that he has. He says, imagine that you had a long rope with a heavy weight on the end, and he actually has one of his students do it with a bag. And he says, if you were throwing this around your body like this, the bag, he says, to stay in balance, you have to create a force vector to counteract the momentum of this swinging weight around your body. Now, in a golf swing, we don't swing it there, but certainly in the downswing, the club is swinging in front of you like this. And Mike Malaska says, what you have to do to stay in balance is the forward motion, you can almost say a centrifugal outward motion of what body would pull you forward, and you have to push back. So he says the feeling is, I'll do it from down the line, he says is that you push back from your forefoot back in that direction. Look at that. Like you're pushing your hips back to counteract this motion. And that makes a lot of sense. So he says where you are pushing at any moment in time depends where the momentum is. So in your early downs, when your hands are here, the feeling is you're pushing with your right hip. He says when you come to impact here, it's the left hip you pushes back. And one thing he says, which actually surprised me, he says that your left hip should reach what I'll show you soon, the tush line, at impact. So that means that in your downswing, you feel you're pushing back in the downswing. Now this motion that he describes is not an active pivot action, because Mike Malaska states, he says, you don't feel that you're using muscles to rotate your pelvis actively. He says, what you're doing basically is reacting to the momentum of the club and your arms going with the body, and you react by doing this motion to keep it balanced. And that it's a reactive pivot motion. Now, if you think about it, it does explain something I've noticed about Mike Malaska's swing. So when you look at Mike Malaska impact, here, I've noticed his pelvis is squared to the target and his upper body. While if you look at most professional golfers, they don't look like that at impact, right? I'll do it from this view. They don't look square like Malaska. What they do, this pelvis is open 40, 50 degrees, and their shoulders are open. So there's something very different to the pivot motion. So this is, I'm going to try and duplicate what Mike Malaska says. He says, as you're swinging back, just let your pelvis react, and you can see how it induces that type of pivot motion like that, and then you're going to be square at impact. Now, I'm going to describe a different way to perform the pivot, and I believe the advantage of the way I'm going to describe it is that I believe the pivot is the workhorse of the golf swing. That if you want to hit the ball 300 to 350 yard drives, like Dustin Johnson or Justin Thomas or Brooks Koepka, you are going to have to pivot fast. So the Mike Malaska swing, I believe, one of its handicaps is Mike Malaska says that to swing your arms faster, you must do that with greater force. But even if you do that with greater force, it would keep you in balance. But I don't see how that motion actually drives a rotary pivot action. So I believe when you look at professional golfers, they have a distinctive rotary motion of their pelvis, followed by a rotary motion of the upper torso, with a certain degree of torso-pelvic separation. And I believe it's that rotary motion, starting with the pelvis and then the upper body, which allows them to generate so much swing power, because now I'm so inflexible I can't do that fast. Now, the critical point that I'm going to get Jim to demonstrate it is, I'll show you how different it is from Mike Malaska's pivot motion. So, get you in backswing position. Let's stay more or less, yeah? Notice he's rotated his pelvis about 50 degrees. He's turned into the thing. Between P4 and P5, that's the early downswing. In this zone, notice he squares his pelvis. And he looks like Mike Malaska at impact. In other words, he has 50 degrees of pelvic rotation. He's squared his hips in the early downswing. This is before the club is even released. Remember, Mike Malaska says the pelvis reacts to the momentum of the club. So that means your club only gets there in your mid-late downswing. While Jim has already squared his pelvis before he even gets to the end of his early downswing. Before he even gets to there, the pelvis is squared. So the question is, how does he do that? And I believe the way to do it, which I've described in great detail in a review paper on my website called Critical Update, How to Optimally Rotate the Pelvis in the Downswing, is he uses the lateral pelvic rotator muscles. And there are 6 lateral pelvic rotator muscles called gemellus superior, gemellus inferior, obturator internus, obturator externus, quadratus femoris, and piriformis. And what Jim is doing is he's using those muscles to start his downswing. Now, let's look at him from down the line. Because he's using those particular muscles, let's look to see what he looks like at P5. Notice he still has space here, right? In other words, he's not spinning his hips. So he's generating a tremendous amount of rotary torque without spinning the hips. And I believe this is the optimal way to perform the golf swing.
Define spinning the hips, you mean this, right?
Yeah. So let's talk about hip spinning. There's this famous video that Tiger Woods did with Butch Harmon on the Golf Channel in the year about 2000. In his early career, Tiger Woods said, "Ole, I'm blocked." So he had this problem. Why was he blocked? One reason is he spun his hips. A second reason is that he had what I call an uncoordinate or asynchronous swing action. Because although I believe you should start with the pelvis, if you start with your pelvis with such an aggressive rotary motion that your pelvis is already open and your shoulders are back there, then you're stuck. even if you don't spin your hips. So a key problem I think that Tiger Woods had, he had too much torso-pelvic separation with an element of right hip spinning. And I noticed that Mike Malaska says this is, in fact, a huge problem if you want to use an active swing. Now, why do people spin their hips like that? They're using the wrong muscles. They're using the gluteus maximus muscle, which when it contracts, it extends the hip, pushes you forward, and if you really do it a lot, it's called goat humping or early extension. Right? You could demonstrate that. See, standing up, notice he's losing his spine angle, that's going forward. So Mike Malaska's solution, of course, is to say you shouldn't feel that you're moving your pelvis actively, you should use that technique that he describes of creating a force vector away from the ball target line. But I'm saying that I believe that if you do that technique, you can't be retaining your pelvis as actively as Jim is. So I think the optimum solution is to do what Jim is doing, is to use the correct muscles to induce a very fast rotation. Now, I'm going to say something else. Get to P5. Do an active pelvic motion. See, notice that two things are happening. He squares his pelvis and he keeps anterior pelvic tilt. Now, the question becomes, what happens in the later downswing? Because Mike Malaska is correct. At impact, if your hands are now traveling and you're traveling at its maximum speed, pulling you outwards, how do you keep your balance? Because in this technique, your pelvis is open, and your shoulders are open. And the way you keep your balance is two factors are happening. So go to your impact position, with a straightened leg. If you look at Jim at impact, two things are happening. This leg is straightening, elevating the pelvis. This side of his body is extending, which moves the left shoulder socket upwards and inwards. See, look at that motion. This force of the left hip moving back, you see it's moving that direction. The force of his left shoulder moving back is producing a force vector which keeps him in balance. So although the club is being pulled out, if you do the pivot motion like a professional golfer, you are automatically producing the force vectors to keep you in balance, right, with this correct motion. What I'm going to do now, I've covered most of the ground I wanted to cover. But what I'm going to do, I've got 3 pages of notes that I made. I'm just going to look through them before I summarize, the differences between the two swing actions, to refer to some comments that Mike Malaska has made either in his book or in his video, and where I disagree. So, I'm going to read a paragraph that comes from his book called I Feel Your Pain, Let's Make Golf Uncomplicated, and it's at the Kindle location 1467. And this is the paragraph. Invisibility has led to some misunderstandings. The benefits of early rotation in our downswing are numerous, but 2 in particular make this action critical. First, early rotation means the club face will have minimal rotation through impact. The less the club rotates through impact, the more accurate you can be as the club face stays more square. So I agree with Mike Malaska that you want to have a low ROC through impact. Now, Mike Malaska is claiming in these 2 sentences that it's the early rotation in the downswing that allows him to have a minimal rotation through impact. And I'm saying that can't possibly be true. I simply cannot understand how it could be true. I've thought about it, and think about it. Let's presume you're forming a counterclockwise rotation of your left arm. course, you're doing it down here because you don't want to come over the top. So this is happening. But how does it affect how much rotation you get through impact? And I'm saying, even though he claims he's rotating, we know that he's actually not. Because he says this feeling of doing this motion is to counteract the club this way. And if you look at Mike Malaska at this position, P6, his club face is exactly the same position as a golfer who's using the intact left arm flying wedge technique. From this position, he has to square the face. So the amount of rotation that's happening in the late downswing, again, is identical. The point I'm making is if you rotate your arm in your backswing by a finite amount, you're going to have to rotate it by exactly the same amount to get a square club face of impact. Presuming you don't have the slight variations of different amounts of forward shaft lean and so on. But roughly the same. So although golfers might vary as exactly when they rotate it, the total amount of rotation has to be the same to get squared impact. And that doesn't affect whether you have a low ROC or a high ROC through impact. I believe what causes a high ROC through impact is flip rolling. And this flip rolling motion is intrinsic to Mike Malaska's pivot action, because he says, and he's got a drill, he calls it the hockey stick drill. He says one of the most useful thoughts for him is what hockey players does, and he splits his hand on the club like this, and he says the feeling is, like hockey players on the ice, is as you come into impact, you stall the motion of your forward arm here at your pivot point, while this one is pushing, you're powering it like that. And then you notice that he does this, he straightens the right wrist and pronates the form like this so that he can then swivel onto the plane in that action. And I believe that action the whole action makes it more likely, I think, particularly if you're a golfer. Mike Malaska, as best I can understand, does not imply that you should use a very active right arm action, right arm straightening and right arm pronation with a lot of force to induce that, right? But if you did, let's say you're a golfer and you've got this mental picture of doing this hockey stick drill, you might exaggerate the swivel motion so that instead of occurring here, where Mike Malaska says after both arms are straight, it might even occur right in impact, and that would be disaster. So I don't believe that early rotation, the feel of early rotation, whether it's a feel or a reality, affects what happens through the immediate impact zone between P7 and P7.2. Now, I'm going to quote another paragraph from his book, and this is Kindle location 1446. And this has to do with the release of what Homer Kelly called power accumulator number 2. So we know, for instance, that in a golf swing, if you think of it in TGM terms, you release power accumulator number 4, which is the left arm, and then at a certain point the left wrist uncocks. And when it uncocks in the plane of radial to ulnar deviation like that. In TGM terms, we say it releases in the plane of your flying wedge, like that. And most professional golfers release the club in this zone. And Homer Kelly said that if you release the club somewhere in this zone, that's called a random club release action. While if you release it too early, like David Toms, that's called a sweep release. And if you release it very late, if you got like Dustin Johnson to here, and that's a late release. But most professional golfers are releasing it there. So the question is, how do you induce this release? Well, what makes the club release in this plane? So the best, when I try to interpret Mike Malaska's thinking, he says, I need to just demonstrate another point. Mike Malaska says, when you move your club, notice over the plane like this, the feel of it, you pull it inside. He says the club head moves from behind your hands to in front of your hands over your pivot point. You notice he uses the word over. Of course, in the real swing, when your hands are moving forward, it doesn't look like that. But the feel of it's that way. Now, what's the feel like for an intact left arm flying wedge golfer? Notice that the club is coming down the plane and this hand is under. The right palm is under the shaft here because you're using a pitch elbow motion. It's supporting the flying wedge. Notice when the club releases, it releases in the plane of the flying wedge because your flying wedge is parallel to that plane. Notice it's releasing like that. Notice that it's releasing under your hands like that. See? It's a very distinctive, different feel. Now, Mike Malaska says you don't feel like you're releasing two when you do this action. He says when you get the bird action is a feeling of rotation. He says the release will just happen. Now, what causes it to happen? He says it happens due to gravity and the weight of the club. Now, I don't understand that. What does it mean to say the weight of the club and gravity releases the club? And I do agree if the club has momentum, it releases. And I believe there's a much better way of understanding it. And that I believe the release happens according to the principle of the double pendulum. So here is two paint sticks that I have. And this is essentially the principle of the double pendulum. And if you look at the golf testing machines, they call them Iron Byron machines or golf robots, they work on this principle. They have what's called the central arm, which would represent your left arm. And then this is called the peripheral arm, and that represents the club shaft. So if you have a 90-degree angle here, what causes the club to release in your downswing? I have to get this hinge joint in the correct position. Notice, sorry, let's get it a little tighter. This is a very crude double pendulum. But basically, if this hinge joint moves downwards in a straight line like that, it does not induce the release. But as soon as this moves in a circular manner, watch what happens. See how the club releases and catches up to this arm. So what causes the release in a professional quality golf swing is the circular path of your hands. So what you are actually doing is you shape your hand-arm path so that it's moving more or less downwards, round, and then eventually to the target. And the shape of your hand-arm path creates a force. Now, what's actually happening, and I'm going to explain it to you in a little bit more detail. The center of gravity of your club is a few inches away from the club head. And when you move your hands downwards, and your hands are now starting to move in a circular manner, you could say U-shaped, I don't know if you want to say the hand arc is U-shaped, is that the center of gravity of the club develops angular momentum due to a principle called the alembic principle. And there's a mathematical physical principle which calculates exactly the speed of release of the club based on the change in hand-arc path and the speed of hand-arc motion. Now, to me, the wonderful thing is that when you have an intact flying wedge, which is parallel to your plane, the club releases in the plane, so it's a very smooth motion. You don't do it actively. You never uncock your left wrist deliberately. You never use the muscles in your forearm called flexor carpi ulnaris to ulnar deviated. It just happens passively, but it happens smoothly because your flying wedge is into the plane. Now, conceive of a rotary motion like Mike Malaska says, in this zone. Now, if the club is actually releasing in this zone, that means the plane of ulnar deviation is not perfectly aligned to the rotary motion. And that's a complexity which I've never seen Mike Malaska deal with. And his way of talking about the release is as follows. I'm going to read it. And he talks of imagining this U-shaped path that your hands take as being like a race car track. And he says, you coming towards the corner, and you want the car to turn the corner, which is your hands, and the club. The club releases in that U-shaped manner. And he says, in a car, you avoid the wall by anticipating the corner. You set the car up for the turn. In the golf swing, you set the club up to negotiate the corner of the downswing by rotating with your left arm, if you are right-handed, as soon as you start this downswing. And then he says, as the club drops through the turn in the downswing, the club will be accelerating the whole way, courtesy of gravity. In a race car, you use the steering wheel. In a golf, the steering wheel is the left arm rotating the grip and the club. So from what I understand he's saying, he's stating you want to induce the release at some point. And he says you anticipated coming to the corner, and this club has to turn the corner, and that's part of the release. He says you do it by rotating as if this is a steering wheel. But I can't understand that personally, because I'm saying this rotary motion, I'll do it from down the line, is not in the plane of left wrist and cocking. So, you know, I'm basically saying, according to the laws of physics, and according to the law of the double pendulum, what causes it to uncock is the change in the hand-arc path in the plane of the arc. And that's why I believe having your left arm flying wedge on the correct plane is so useful.
Do you want to show the steering wheel with the tennis racket?
Well, you could do that. So Mike Malaska has a video to show the feeling of this rotation from the top. So you can see in the standard swing, this doesn't rotate. So it comes down like this. Now, this uncocks in this plane like that. And it's in the plane of the flying wedge, right? Like that. But Mike Malaska's concept is from the top, you rotate. So this is, you turn. It's like it, look at this. You turn in a steering wheel. Okay?
Right.
But pull it in. Don't let it go out. Yeah, and then let the club release. So look at that motion. Now, what I have a difficult time understanding, because I'm so interested in the mechanics and biomechanics of the golf swing, and I've studied a lot about physics, is I can't understand how a rotary motion in that manner, which is not in the plane of the release, can actually induce the release. I mean, I certainly respect the idea in his swing. It says it's just a feel, because if you look at his club shaft, it stays down the plane. But I can't understand how the feel induces the release. I really do believe that it happens according to the principle of the double pendulum, which is the shape of your hand-arc path in the plane of the release. I'm just going to read through these things in case there's something else that I want to talk about. here's one interesting thing that I'll talk about, and that is what's Jack Nicklaus. Now, Jack Nicklaus is apparently very friendly with Mike Malaska. I don't know the extent of it, but I do believe they're in frequent contact. And Mike Malaska, I asked Jack Nicklaus, what did he mean by an early release? And yeah, so when I think of the term release, on which many people think of the release, it's the release of the club. And that's called in TGM terms the release of power accumulator number 2. So Mike Malaska apparently asked Jack, is that what you mean? And Jack apparently was amazed that he thought that. He said, no, you would never uncock it from the club. So Mike Malaska says, what do you mean then by an early release? And of course, I don't know exactly how Jack Nicklaus phrased it, but he stated something like, you try to get the club head in front of you. So Mike Malaska has interpreted this, or maybe even is what you do to get the club head in front of you is this rotary motion. So that's the rotary motion, you see how it gets the club from behind my shoulder to in front of me. Now, if Jack Nicklaus said that, I'm actually surprised, because I would have thought of it differently. In other words, I do agree in the concept of an early release, but how do I think of an early release? So I'm going to get Jim to demonstrate what we think of as an early release. I'll put this aside. So, as I said, at your end backswing, in the swing action that, Jim and I promote, is from the top of the swing, the driving engine is first pelvic rotation, then upper body. Notice that, don't go so far down, just go down the first 12 inches. In the first part, notice the club is getting pulled down, and it's not releasing yet. No, hang on, go back. Just move it about 3 to 6 inches. In this period of time, the distance between his hand and his shoulder is not increasing. So he's not releasing the club. But almost from here, power accumulator number 4 releases, so that the distance from the hands to the right shoulder increases. And that's the release of power accumulator number 4. It's this motion like that. So I would have thought that's what Jack Nicklaus said is the early release. So if Jack Nicklaus says that you should release as soon as possible and not how long, because you see, you certainly don't want to do this. You see people, they do a technique where they try to keep it like this for too long. Notice that the distance between my hands and the right shoulder is not increasing. People drag it down like this. You can't play golf dragging it like that. You've got to let the club release so it can gain momentum. And if Jack Nicklaus says you can't release it too early, and if he meant you can't let your left arm start to get into motion too early, I would agree with that in that understanding. I would have a hard time understanding the concept of it being a rotary motion, personally.
And Jack Nicklaus didn't.
Yeah, I mean, in his swing, I've looked at a lot of Jack Nicklaus swings. This is what he looks like before. Well, actually, he was higher because he had a flying right elbow and his arm was higher than his thing. And the first thing, you see it coming down, down, down. Notice that this is shallower. This forearm at the end backswing was pronated to a certain degree. By the time he came to this position here, P5.5, this was more pronated. In other words, it's turning clockwise, not anti-clockwise. Now, Jack Nicklaus says, although that happened, it didn't feel like it. It felt like I was doing the opposite. I'm not the person to contradict what someone says. I'm trying to understand what he stated. But, I would have thought it would have been the release of power accumulator number 4. Are there any other issues you think we haven't discussed with us?
Well, one thing, Jeff, is Mike gives an example in one of his videos of a tennis serve. And he throws the ball up and he kind of does the same kind of motion here, you know, with kind of flipping.
So, you know, Mike Malaska, and I always attempt to do the same thing, is I often look at sports analogies that could help you perform a golf swing. And I mentioned to you, my mental picture is a backhanded tennis shot. Another thing I said, that if you decide to use your right forearm as like a double hand, then you must do it like a forehand tennis shot. And notice, if you're playing tennis and you come into impact using a four-handed tennis shot, you have to have a bent wrist to have a square face. You can't have it straight. But in a tennis serve, you could do that. Another analogy is basketball. You know, if you throw it into a hoop, this straightens. So Mike Malaska, in his golf swing action, he has the belief that your right wrist straightens through impact, as an analogy. And I have been emphasizing that in the flying wedge concept, you shouldn't be straightening your right wrist. Now, it reminded me of something else, of another analogy, which I think is the most useful sports analogy that I find useful in terms of helping you to get the feel of a golf swing action. And that comes from Ben Hogan's book called 5 Easy Lessons. And Ben Hogan talked in his book about a two-handed basketball pass from the right side. And he said the feeling that he gets from here to impact, it's like throwing a basketball with two hands. Now the critical thing, think of the motion of it. Here, how do you actually do it? Now in his book he said something which most people overlook, because in his book he said, I wish I had 3 right hands, you know, to apply more power. And people think, well, if you throw in the basketball, probably he's throwing it with the right hand. And of course with a basketball you can't pull with the left hand because there's nowhere to pull, you have to push. But this is an exercise ball called a Spree dual handle exercise ball. Now, this is my favorite exercise for golf. I have a ball like this at home, and what I do is I do this motion. It feels like a two-handed motion. I go back and throw. Now, in this motion, why it's such a good exercise in the backswing, it stretches, you know, my muscles in my mid and upper torso. It gets me like that. And then in the forward swing, because of the weight of the ball, I have to use a lot of power to throw it. And of course, I'll show you how to actually perform this so that it looks like a golf swing. But the point I want to show you here is because it's got dual handles, it allows you to pull the ball, and this one behind it could push. And to do it correctly, I believe, the feeling that you should have is both hands are moving in perfect synchrony. So the left hand is pulling and the right hand is pushing. Now I want you to watch very carefully what I look like through the impact zone. You notice I still have a bent right wrist. Notice that my left wrist is flat. There's no flipping. Notice that when you go through impact, and in Ben Hogan's book, he has a target in front of him. He says the feeling is you throw towards the target. Why did he say to the target? Why didn't he say inside left or up plane? Because if you did that, you would be throwing like this, right? But he said, no, throw to the target. And that's a wonderful feeling for me, because when you perform this action, watch how you're going through impact. Notice this is pure drive holding. Bent wrist, flat left wrist, or bowed wrist. If you're going through impact, you pull here. Now it's optional to finish your swing, to swivel onto your plane, because you can finish your swing 2 ways. You see some golfers like Zach Johnson's arms are outstretched to the target, but a lot of professional golfers want to swing the club around their body and around their back. So at some point they have to swivel. But I'm saying you don't swivel through impact. Another thing about this is I want you to notice that my hands are always on the equator of the ball. Notice I'm not doing this. The ball's not rotating counterclockwise. So in Mike Malaska's move from here, the feeling is you pull your hands inside. That's the feel. But of course, in the real swing, because your hands are moving to the target, it should smooth out. And then after impact, he does it like that. Swivels onto the plane. While I'm saying, this is my idea of a golf swing. It's this motion. Another thing that you could use this ball as a training aid is, notice I'm doing it with my arms. Now let's presume that you started this motion with an upper body rotation and kept your pelvis static. So notice that when I do this exercise, I make sure my pelvis gets 40 to 50 degrees of rotation, and like that. And then I want to start with the pelvis. Notice what happens when you start with the pelvis. Look at the path of the ball. It's downwards and forwards. If I started with my upper body, what would happen? It's over the top, right? So when doing this exercise, not only is it a good exercise, but it can train you to perform the golf swing correctly. In other words, you must start with your pelvis, feel your hands come from inside, like that. So I think it's you could go in and you probably do it with greater fluidity than I am. And you see how his hands, there's no, see what I like about this when you look at it as a mental image. For me, it epitomizes the golf swing, which is a non-rotary motion. The only rotation that you can see happening is a small amount of rotation here. You see there, you see how his hands rotate to get to the back of his left hand to face the target. That's it. But it's more a feeling of a swinging motion. You know. And go back to the position. Notice he starts with the pelvis. Look how his hands get pulled down. Then the follow through, go through. I want you to follow through. Yeah, see, and you can pull it all the way through. But at least for 6 to 12 inches, notice there's no flipping, he doesn't flip, and he doesn't supinate his form. And I believe this is such a useful tool to practice the swing. If you have sympathy for my concept of using a TGM swinging action with an intact left arm flying wedge that's always on plane, using a drive hold hand release action through impact.
Jeff, it seems like earlier in the video you said you were going to tell us the name of your move. Did I miss something? Or you said, I thought at the beginning you said this is the Malaska move?
Yeah.
And later on I'm going to tell you the name of...
I don't really have a name. In other words, what I was referring to, I didn't want to use the word standard swing because there is no standard swing. I didn't want to say a PGA Tour golfer swing because there's so many variations in PGA Tour golfers. So the best way I would describe it is intrinsically is a TGM lead arm swing in action driven by a pivot where the motion is characterized by an intact left arm flying wedge that remains intact and characterized by a drive hold hand release action. So I can't think of one word to describe it, but it's an alternative way of thinking of the golf swing than Mike Malaska's swing, which, as I said, I picture it as, I think this L2L motion is what does it, which you do well. So whenever I picture go L2L with that Mike Malaska rotary motion, I can see why Mike Malaska describes the golf swing as a rotation of the arms, as being the core motion, while I'm describing it more as a swinging motion of the arms with only a small amount of rotation needed in the late downswing to square the face. I can't think of anything else, so we're going to call it quits now and say thank you very much for watching. I'm sure there are many partisan Mike Malaska Move supporters who are going to criticize me, and I entirely welcome it. In fact, there's always a comment section in the bottom of YouTube videos, and if you think that I've misrepresented Mike Malaska's thinking, or I didn't emphasize something, or I got something wrong, feel free to criticize it. If you feel that the alternative swing which I'm describing is unsuitable for a number of reasons, feel free to comment in that section. I don't edit it. In other words, your comments will be there as long as it's free of unnecessary ad hominem insults, which some people have a propensity to indulge in. So thank you very much for watching this.
Let me just also include, Jeff, that I think the proof is in the pudding, right? And if the Malaska Move works in your swing, just like Jeff said earlier, and you're consistent with it, then absolutely use it. Some people need it, possibly.
I can think of people who need it, for instance, senior golfers.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm 68 years old and I have a lot of flexibility problems. And I can see why that move is really good for people like me. If you can perfect this rotary motion in the way that Mike Malaska describes, it definitely works. I mean, you see his ball strike, he strikes it very straight, beautiful ball trajectory, definitely a workable solution. And I'm definitely not standing here and saying that you can't use it. I'm just pointing out the differences, the advantages and disadvantages compared to the swing that professional golfers use, like you. I wish I could swing like you. I have to use a lot of compensatory moves.
Yeah, but I just think
Stand back.
so much of it is consistency. So I think a lot of golfers will say, they get the timing right, and they hit a great shot, and they think, okay, I did the Malaska Move correctly, but then that's only 1 out of 10 shots, and the other shots, pull to the left, they hook to the left, they push to the right, and they're still in the same boat with any other method,
Yeah. But I could imagine that a Mike Malaska, a partisan supporter, would say, well, the same thing happens in the swing that I'm describing, that you could push because you can't release 2 and 3 properly because you're putting your hands in, or you could perform certain imperfections that every swing type is difficult to manage. Golf, I think, is one of the most difficult sports because there's so many moving parts. And although I believe that the way that professional golfers perform the swing, it, in a sense, uses the least amount of unnecessary moving parts, a lot of people wouldn't agree with me and they would see it differently. And I respect that, if people have alternative opinions.
But it is interesting how so many of the top tour pros use the method that you described.
I mean, that's where I got the method from. I didn't invent it. There's nothing, in other words, all I did, I spent the last 10 years assiduously studying the golf swing of professional golfers like, Adam Scott in particular, and Henrik Stenson and Justin Rose. And I said to myself, how do they do this? I mean, with such perfection. And, so I've studied intensely the underlying mechanics and biomechanics to understand it. And now that I think I understand it better, I can see why they do it that way. It makes so much sense. But I think that's it. So thank you very much for watching, and feel free to comment if you disagree with anything I've said. Thank you.
Thank you.